Hello and welcome to this week's Monday Music Motivation. This week I wanted to tackle something that's a little bit unintuitive, I think, and as I get more and more into kind of the science of learning and practice science and the most effective practice strategies, it's really becoming apparent to me that first the notion of practice makes perfect definitely isn't true. And even the notion of perfect practice makes perfect also isn't true, because I bet if I told you that in your practice you shouldn't be sounding like you want to sound in performance, you would think that's kind of crazy. And it does feel a little kind of crazy and a little counterintuitive, but it lends us to this idea of kind of practice and effective practice doesn't feel like you probably think effective practice should feel. I think it's very common and very normal to think like, okay, I have this piece of music, I'm going to practice it, and what I want to feel is comfortable with the piece of music. And I want to practice it in such a way that I get the notes under my fingers and I figure out how the rhythm works and the musicality and what I have to do on the instrument to make it sound good. And I'm getting comfortable with it so that I can eventually give a sort of comfortable and confident performance, which is a good idea and seems very intuitive and very logical. However, that kind of practicing will more often than not lead to kind of unsteady and shaky performance, because as you're practicing, you're trying to get comfortable with it and you kind of achieve a certain level of comfort with it. And then you go into the performance thinking like, okay, I'm like 80, 90, even 95% comfortable with this, but what about that 5% that might go wrong, and that 5% that still isn't comfortable? And that is such a normal kind of practice story for people, I think, where we're practicing, and in practice we're working stuff up and feeling comfortable with it and getting it up to tempo and sounding the way that we want it to go as we're practicing these different sections or even whole pieces. And then in the performance it kind of falls apart a little bit, or even if it doesn't fall apart, we're feeling kind of anxious and nervous with it. What this looks like, if you kind of look at it from a different angle then, is that in the short term, it feels really good and you feel like you have things down, and in that practice session, you feel like you made really great progress. But then in the long term, as you go to perform and things like that, the progress doesn't stick as well, and you get to the performance feeling not so confident and worried about that 5% of problem areas. The opposite of that would be feeling less comfortable and like you've made less progress and maybe things have gone backwards in an individual practice session, but then over the long term it kind of magically gets better, and then in the performance you feel totally relaxed and natural and in control and getting what you want. So how do we actually do that in an individual practice session? Well, the key is to introduce tons of novelty into your playing as you're working on a specific piece. So doing one phrase over and over and over and over until it sounds good is going to be that kind of short-term satisfaction style of practice. Instead, what we want to do is we want to take one phrase and we want to break it down into 100 different ways and dissect it and nitpick it and look at an individual beat and get that ironed out and moving the fingers perfectly on that individual beat. We want to do practice rhythms and change things up. We want to maybe not even look at a phrase at a time and just look at a measure at a time or a beat at a time or something like that, and really break it up, break it down, dissect it, flip it inside out, turn it upside down, do all of those things to get as kind of deep into the details of the music as we possibly can. And when we do that, that helps it to really structure in our brains properly and get it into our deep long-term memory. And then you can do some satisfying practice. Once you've like really broken it down, really dissected and really gone deep into it, then you can do kind of retrieval practice where you play a whole phrase or even a small segment of the phrase again, but do it more in performance mode and kind of how you want it to go in performance, and then it can be satisfying. But the feeling that you should have in an individual practice session is like, oh, my brain hurts and I worked like crazy and hey, I never really got it put together where it's sounding great and is all all put together, especially in the early stages of learning a piece. And trust that kind of brain exhaustion and that working with it and wrestling with it and wrangling it into all kinds of different configurations and introducing all that novelty and contextual interference and things like that, trust that that's going to sink in and make it so much stronger for you in the long term. So to summarize this, bad practice, it's not terrible practice. You can get by with this kind of practice, and there's even a lot of professionals who do, and even for me, oftentimes I do this kind of practice. But the less efficient practice is you feel like you've made a lot of progress in that session, and you've gotten chunks or sections or phrases kind of up to how you want it to sound in performance, but then the next day it feels like you're starting from scratch again. Effective practice feels like you isolated and honed in and dialed in onto this one thing, and it didn't really quite come together, but you sure thought about it a whole lot, but it's a little unsatisfying because it didn't quite come together. But then the next day you go to play it, and now you can do it easily, no problem. So that's the indicator of if things get worse on the next day when you come back to it, then you aren't practicing as effectively as you can. If things have gotten magically better on the next day as you come back to it, then that's good, effective practice. And if things are getting worse the next day, then that means that you need to have a little less satisfaction of just kind of playing through it and hearing it how you want it to go and getting close to that end goal. And you need to dive in and dissect a little bit more and break things down and introduce the contextual interference and have more novelty and creativity in your practice. So let me know in the comments if you have any questions about any of those ideas. This is kind of more abstract stuff and isn't intuitive at all, but I promise it works. Hopefully this gives you a little bit of inspiration and motivation this week for those unsatisfying practice sessions. You can trust that things are going to sink in and it's going to come together. And as a reminder, when things feel like, okay, I'm just kind of playing through things and things are easy, dig in a little bit more so that it can get even better as you're taking time off. And of course, you can put that into your practice journal and fill out the practice template so that you have a great week of practicing. Here's what the template looks like, and you can get this exact thing at quickstartclarinet.com/get-started, or put in the date for the week, reflection of how things are going, goal for what you want to achieve this week, and then your plan for how and when you're going to make it happen. Take that plan, put it in your calendar, set reminders, have it in your planner, however you organize your life. Actually schedule it so that it happens, and try that kind of more creative practicing this week. Introduce more novelty, dig in, dissect a little bit more than you feel like you need to, and trust that getting into those details is going to bubble up all of these little issues. And I'll give you just one other evidence for how this works and why this works. When you dig in really deep, you find like, oh, this interval isn't as clean as I thought it was, or, oh, I didn't actually realize that C sharp was carrying through the measure there, or, okay, I need to actually get this slur to the staccato followed by the accent or whatever the funky articulation things are. When you're looking with kind of the microscope at a smaller section, going slower, digging in and dissecting more, you notice all of those details and clean those things up. What happens when we perform and the adrenaline gets going is we have our little heightened senses, heightened state of arousal, so we can hear things a little bit better, we can notice things a little bit more, our brain is thinking a little bit faster, and in performance you'll catch like, oh, there was supposed to be a staccato at the end of that slur, and then you start thinking about that, and then that derails you. Whereas if you're really dissecting things, you're getting all of those details in there from the beginning. So even though it's not perfect, practice makes perfect, because you're not going to be just playing it how it's supposed to go all the time, every single time, but you are going to be getting in there and plugging in more detailed and nuanced pieces about how it should go. So give that a try for this week. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Make your plan, fill out the practice template right now so that you can have a great week of practice. Have that great week of practice, and I will see you next week for the next Monday Music Motivation. Have a great week, everybody. Bye.